First contact with the impossible. Senior observer Xelkin recorded the proceedings of the Galactic Council with practiced detachment, though even his disciplined mind couldn't help but note the futility of the discussion. His four-lobed brain processed the conversation while his secondary nervous system maintained his official documentation duties. The evacuation of the Trashian expedition from planet Mars is now complete, announced High Counselor Vextra, her luminescent tendrils dimming slightly in what Selkin recognized as resigned disappointment. This marks the 17th failed colonization attempt. The assembled representatives of the Galactic Council shifted uncomfortably in their environmental chambers. The massive council hall accommodated 34 distinct species, each requiring specific atmospheric conditions to survive. The Trashians lasted 46 standard cycles, continued Vextra. Better than the Gantheri, who survived only 22, but not as impressive as the Mulverians, who managed nearly 100 before the planet's ecosystems decimated their settlement. Ambassador Quillith of the Trashian Collective rose on his anti-gravity platform. We employ our most advanced terraforming technologies and dispatched our most resilient colonists. The planet actively resisted every attempt at establishing a foothold. The atmospheric composition shifts unpredictably. The native flora secretes compounds that corrode even our most resistant materials. The fauna. He paused, his voice modulator emitting a sound approximating a shudder. The fauna appears to have evolved specifically to eliminate any non-native presence. Zelkin added a private note to his official record. Planet Mars continues to defy colonization efforts despite containing resource deposits that could revolutionize galactic manufacturing and medicine. Estimated resource value, 74.3 trillion universal credits. Estimated colonization attempts cost to date, 19.8 trillion universal credits. Yet we cannot simply abandon our efforts, stated Economic Director Zopak, his crystalline form glittering anxiously under the council lights. The rare mineral veins alone could solve the power generation crisis affecting the outer rim systems, not to mention the unique biological compounds that could advance medical science by centuries. Perhaps, came a voice from the back of the chamber, you have been approaching the problem incorrectly. Selkin's attention shifted to the source. Ambassador Chen Wei of Earth stood calmly at her station. The human was notably the only representative in the room not utilizing an environmental chamber, despite the council atmosphere being calibrated for the Valerian majority. The council recognizes Ambassador Chen Wei of Earth, announced Vextra, unable to completely hide her skepticism. Thank you, High Counselor. The human smiled. My government would like to formally request colonization rights to planet Mars. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds, clicks, whistles, electromagnetic pulses, and subsonic rumblings, as the various species expressed their shock, amusement, or concern in their native communications. Selkin noted that several representatives appeared to be laughing. Ambassador, Vextra finally responded after restoring order. Your species has only been part of the Galactic Council for 17 standard years. You have established merely 3 small colonies, all on Class 1 habitable worlds. Mars is classified as a Class 5 death world. No offense intended, but if the Trashians with their silicon-based biology and resistance to corrosive environments couldn't survive there, what makes you believe humans could? The human's expression remained confident, because we come from a death world ourselves. This statement silenced the chamber again, but in a different way. Zelkin found himself intrigued. He had visited Earth once, finding it quite pleasant, if a bit oxygen-rich for his taste. Earth is classified as a Class 2 world, countered Quillith, hardly comparable to Mars. Our classification was adjusted after we joined the Council, Ambassador Chen explained. But for 99% of our evolutionary history, Earth was what you would classify as a Class 4 death world. We evolved alongside predators that could easily kill us, in environments ranging from Arctic wastelands to scorching deserts. Our planet regularly experiences devastating natural phenomena. Hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, that we've learned to endure and rebuild from. Our biology developed to handle extreme temperature variations, exposure to radiation, and countless pathogens. She stepped forward, her voice growing more passionate. More importantly, our psychology evolved to thrive on challenges. Where your civilizations understandably see Moors as an obstacle to overcome with technology, we see it as an environment to adapt to. We don't want to terraform Moors. We want to adapt ourselves to live there. Selkin found himself recording Ambassador Chen's speech with unusual thoroughness, captivated by the audacity of her proposal. After 3 days of heated debate, the council approved the human request by a narrow margin. Most representatives viewed it as a harmless indulgence. Let the humans learn their lesson before they requested something more reasonable. A few, however, seemed genuinely curious. Selkin requested assignment as the official observer of the human expedition. His request was granted with minimal consideration. After all, documenting yet another failed colonization attempt was hardly a coveted assignment. The human colony ship Adaptation entered orbit around Moors 92 days later. Selkin observed from his monitoring station on the Council observation vessel Dispassionate Record, positioned at a safe distance. The human ship was smaller than he had expected, with none of the extensive shielding or defensive systems that previous expeditions had deemed essential. Observer Selkin, came a transmission from the human vessel. This is Colony Director Maya Patil of the Adaptation. We're aware of your monitoring mission and extend an invitation for you to join us on the surface once we've established our initial base. Selkin's 4 hearts pulsed with surprise. Director Patel, I appreciate the invitation, but my mission parameters specify observation from orbit. Additionally, I lack the physiological adaptations to survive on Moors. Understood. The invitation remains open should your parameters change. We're beginning our descent now. Selkin watched through his monitoring systems as the human landing craft departed the main vessel. Unlike previous expeditions that had sent down automated construction units to build extensively shielded and isolated habitats before any living beings descended, the humans were landing directly with minimal preparation. Through his high-resolution feeds, Selkin observed the landing party emerge onto the surface. Their environmental suits appeared remarkably thin compared to the mechanized exoskeletons the Trashans had employed. The humans moved with surprising agility as they began setting up simple prefabricated structures in a valley that 3 previous expeditions had designated as minimally lethal. Director Patel was the first to step out, conducting atmospheric readings before signaling to the others. The wind swirled with corrosive particulates that glittered ominously in the orange-hued sunlight. In the distance, between the jagged rock formations, something large moved, a predator native to Moors that had destroyed countless exploration drones. Initial readings confirm what we expected. Patel's voice came through Selkin's monitoring systems. Atmospheric corrosion rate at 42% above our test stimulations. Gravitational fluctuations within tolerable parameters. Local fauna activity. Interesting. Looks like we've already caught someone's attention. Instead of the expected concern, her voice carried a note of fascination. The rest of the landing team emerged, moving with practiced efficiency as they established a perimeter and began setting up equipment. Dr. Okafor, begin your soil analysis. Rodriguez, set up the early warning grid. Chen and Ivanov, get the shelter modules secured before that storm front hits. Everyone, remember protocol. Observe, adapt, integrate. We're not here to conquer this world. We're here to become part of it. Selkin found this approach puzzling. Previous expeditions had focused on isolation, creating sterile environments protected from Moor's hostile elements. These humans appeared to be taking the opposite approach, establishing minimal barriers between themselves and the planet's deadly conditions. Within hours, the storm Patel had mentioned swept through the valley. Winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour carried particles that stripped the protective coating from their equipment. The prefabricated shelters flexed alarmingly but held. Throughout it all, the humans continued working, occasionally retreating to the shelters only when conditions became immediately life-threatening. As darkness fell, a swift and absolute transition due to Moore's rapid rotation, the humans gathered in their main shelter. Through their internal cameras, which they had unexpectedly granted him access to, Selkin watched their first day debriefing. Initial findings, reported a human identified as Dr. Okafor, suggest the soil toxicity is primarily from a fungal network, not inherent to the mineral composition. It's a defense mechanism, not a fundamental property. We might be able to communicate with it biochemically. Communicate with a fungus? Someone asked. In a manner of speaking. On Earth, fungal networks respond to chemical signals. With the right compounds, we might convince this network we're not a threat. Director Patel nodded. Good. Rodriguez, what about our unwelcome visitor? A heavily muscled human with numerous scars displayed footage of a massive six-limbed predator that had approached their perimeter during setup. Classified it as Alpha for now. Fascinating hunting pattern. It uses the magnetic field distortions to mask its approach. But it's cautious, more intelligence than simple predatory instinct. It retreated when we deployed the sonic deterrents, studied our response before withdrawing. Not random aggression, then. That's promising, Paddle replied. Tomorrow we start adaptation protocols. Remember, everyone, we're the invasive species here. We need to earn our place in this ecosystem, not demand it. Zelkin added a personal note to his log. The humans' approach defies conventional colonization methodology. Rather than imposing their requirements on the environment, they appear to be studying how to modify themselves and their behaviors to accommodate it. While failure remains the statistically probable outcome, their methodology warrants continued observation. By the 30th day, Selkin had revised his prediction from imminent failure to possible short-term survival. The human settlement had not only endured, but had expanded in unexpected ways. Their original prefabricated structures now served merely as a core, surrounded by new constructions using local materials. They had discovered that certain rock formations, when properly processed, created a resin-like substance that the corrosive atmosphere couldn't penetrate. Their perimeter had been expanded to include what they called integration zones, areas where they encouraged interaction with Moore's ecosystem under controlled conditions. Most surprisingly, they had established what appeared to be a non-aggressive relationship with the predator species they designated Alpha. Rather than killing or driving away the creatures as previous expeditions had done, the humans had studied their territorial behaviors and developed a system of boundaries marked by chemical compounds that the creatures recognized and generally respected. Observer Selkin, Director Patel contacted him on the 60th day. We're preparing for our first resource extraction test tomorrow. Our geologists have developed a method to extract the rare minerals without disrupting the fungal networks. We believe the previous expedition's aggressive mining triggered defensive responses from the ecosystem. Our approach should prove more sustainable. Your progress is unexpected, Selkin admitted, abandoning his usual neutral observer tone. However, the seasonal atmospheric density increase begins in 12 days. No previous expedition has survived this phenomenon. Patel smiled. We're counting on it, actually. Dr. Okafor has developed a filtration system that can capture the higher concentration of particulates during this season. Those particles contain compounds essential for our adaptation efforts. Adaptation efforts? Yes. We're in the early stages of developing biochemical adjustments that will allow us to function outside our environmental suits for progressively longer periods. The increased atmospheric density should accelerate our research. Zelkin struggled to maintain his professional composure. You're attempting to adapt human physiology to Moore's environment, without genetic modification. Through controlled exposure and pharmaceutical support, yes. It's a technique we've used throughout our history, from high-altitude adaptation on Earth to the low-gravity adjustments on Mars. We didn't evolve to survive here, but we can train our bodies to do so. Zelkin found himself fascinated by an approach so fundamentally different from any previous colonization attempt. The prevailing philosophy among council species had always been to engineer environments to suit their needs. The humans were instead engineering themselves to suit the environment. As the first 100 days passed, Selkin's reports to the Galactic Council began attracting attention. Multiple species requested additional data on the human methods. Some expressed ethical concerns about the humans' integration with local predator species and ecosystems. Others simply refused to believe his reports, suggesting he was being deceived by elaborate human simulations. For the first time in his 70-year career as an observer, Selkin requested permission to visit a colony site personally. After extensive debate, the Council approved his request, with the provision that he utilize a sealed environmental unit developed by the Trashans for extreme condition observation. When his shuttle landed at the expanded human settlement 120 days after their arrival, Selkin was unprepared for what he found. What had begun as a simple outpost had evolved into something that could no longer be described as merely a colony. It was becoming a symbiosis, thriving in the unthinkable. Selkin stepped out of his environmental pod, encased in the Trashan design protective suit that represented the pinnacle of galactic isolation technology. The suit was essentially a mobile life support system, completely separating him from Moore's hostile environment. Director Patel greeted him at the landing pad, a smooth platform constructed from local stone that had been treated with some kind of resin. She wore what appeared to be a simple fabric bodysuit, far less substantial than the environmental gear the humans had used upon arrival. "Observer Selkin, welcome to New Adaptation," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting custom. Selkin carefully extended one of his upper appendages, the protective material of his suit preventing any actual contact. "Director Patel, I appreciate you allowing this direct observation. The Council has questions about my reports." A slight smile crossed her face. "They don't believe we're still here. Some have suggested your transmissions are automated and your entire team perished weeks ago," Selkin admitted. She laughed, a sound Selkin had come to recognize as indicating human amusement rather than distress. "Well then, let's give them something substantial to discuss. Would you like a tour?" The settlement defied every colonization principle taught at the Galactic Academy. Instead of the expected hermetically sealed habitats isolated from the local environment, the human structures incorporated the natural landscape. Many buildings were partially embedded in the jagged rock formations, and some appeared to be actively cultivating the local vegetation. "These are our residence units," Paddle explained, indicating structures with curved, organic-looking walls. "We discovered that certain local minerals, when properly processed, not only resist the corrosive atmosphere, but actually absorb and neutralize the particulates. The buildings essentially clean the air around them. You're using local materials rather than imported synthetics?" Selkin asked, already knowing the answer from his orbital observations, but wanting to hear their reasoning. "Imported materials triggered aggressive responses from the local ecosystem," she explained. "Something in the molecular structure was identified as foreign by the fungal networks Dr. Okafor discovered. By using local materials, we signal that we're part of the system, not invaders." As they continued their tour, Selkin noticed humans working outdoors with minimal protective gear. Some wore only breathing masks and eye protection, their skin exposed to the atmosphere that had caused severe chemical burns to previous expeditions. "Your people appear to have developed remarkable resistance to the environmental toxins," he observed. Patel nodded. "Controlled exposure therapy combined with specialized nutritional supplements derived from local organic compounds. We've discovered that many of the toxins are only harmful in certain combinations or concentrations. By gradually introducing our bodies to the individual components, we've developed tolerance." They approached what appeared to be a series of terraced gardens, where humans tended to plants Selkin didn't recognize. "These aren't Earth species," he noted with surprise. "Local flora," confirmed a human who introduced herself as Dr. Ilara Okafor, the settlement's chief biologist. "When we analyzed their toxicity, we discovered something extraordinary. The compounds aren't inherently toxic. They're defensive responses to perceived threats. By introducing specific bacterial cultures from Earth, we've established a biochemical dialogue with the plants. A dialogue. Selkin's translator struggled with the concept. Communication through chemical exchange, she clarified. We've essentially convinced these plants that we're beneficial symbionts rather than threats. In response, they've reduced their toxin production around our settlement and are even producing compounds that help us adapt to the atmosphere. The concept was so foreign to standard colonization protocols that Selkin found himself struggling to categorize it in his report. This wasn't terraforming, the deliberate modification of a planet to suit colonist needs, nor was it simple adaptation, adjusting colonist behavior to accommodate unchangeable planetary conditions. The humans were doing something else entirely, establishing a mutual adaptation between themselves and the planet. Their approach to the local fauna proved equally revolutionary. Rather than eliminating predatory species or establishing impenetrable barriers, the humans had studied the creatures' behaviors and established what they called respectful boundaries. They had identified the chemical markers, the largest predators used for territorial designation, and synthesized their own versions to mark human areas. The big breakthrough came when we realized the predators weren't attacking us for food, explained Security Chief Rodriguez as they observed one of the massive six-limbed creatures, an alpha as the humans had designated them, patrolling just beyond a line of stone markers emitting a faint odor. They were responding to the disruption we caused in the electromagnetic field. Our technology was essentially screaming in their sensory language. "So you quieted your technology?" Selkin asked. "We redesigned our power systems to mimic the natural electromagnetic patterns of the planet. Once we stopped shouting, they stopped attacking. Now they largely ignore us, and some have even begun to treat us as just another species in their ecosystem." By the time they reached the settlement's research center, Selkin's perception of colonization methodologies had been fundamentally challenged. The center itself was built partially underground, utilizing a natural cave system that the humans had expanded. "This is where we conduct our mineral extraction research," Paddle explained as they entered a large chamber filled with equipment and humans in lightweight protective gear. The previous expeditions attempted large-scale mining operations that triggered massive ecosystem responses. We're taking a more surgical approach. A scientist demonstrated their extraction method, using targeted sound waves to vibrate specific mineral deposits, free from the surrounding rock, without disrupting the fungal networks that permeated everything. "The yield is lower per operation," Patil admitted, "but sustainable indefinitely. We've already extracted enough rare elements to justify our mission costs, and production increases monthly as we refine our methods. The Council will find this unexpected," Selkin stated, aware he was understating the case dramatically. "There's more," Patil said, leading him deeper into the facility. "Dr. Reeves, show Observer Selkin what you discovered." A human with streaks of gray in her hair approached, carrying what appeared to be a simple container of liquid. "We call it convergent fluid, though that's an oversimplification. It's a byproduct of the interaction between our Earth bacteria and the local fungal networks." "What does it do?" Selkin asked. "It converts toxic compounds into bioavailable nutrients," she explained. "Initially, we developed it to help us process local food sources, but we've discovered it has remarkable medical applications. It can adapt to almost any biological system and facilitate healing at the cellular level. Preliminary tests suggest it could revolutionize treatment for radiation damage, genetic disorders, even aging processes." Selkin stared at the container. If what they were claiming was true, the fluid represented a medical breakthrough beyond anything in the Council's combined medical knowledge, worth far more than the mineral resources that had motivated the colonization attempts in the first place. "This developed accidentally?" he asked. "Not accidentally," Dr. Reeves corrected. "It emerged from our integration approach. By working with the planet's systems rather than against them, we created the conditions for this discovery." it probably wouldn't have developed in an isolated, sterile colony environment. As the tour concluded, Selkin found himself re-evaluating not just the human colonization of Mars, but the entire Council approach to expansion. For millennia, the galactic community had approached hostile environments as obstacles to overcome with technology, problems to be solved through isolation and control. The humans had demonstrated a fundamentally different philosophy: adaptation, integration, and mutual transformation. "Before you return to your ship," Paddle said as they reached his environmental pod, "there's something I'd like to show you. Something we haven't included in our official reports yet." She led him to a small, sealed chamber adjacent to the medical facility. Through a transparent wall, Selkin observed a human infant sleeping peacefully in what appeared to be a standard medical cradle. "This is Zoe," Paddle said softly, "the first human born on Mars. Her mother was exposed to our adaptation protocols throughout her pregnancy. The medical team monitored her development constantly, ready to evacuate both to orbit if any problems developed." "And," Selkin prompted, sensing there was more to the story, "Zoe's cellular structure shows signs of natural adaptation to Mars' environment. Her skin produces compounds that neutralize atmospheric corrosives. Her respiratory system filters toxins more efficiently than any adult colonist. She's developing symbiotic relationships with beneficial local microorganisms." The implications were staggering. "She's evolving, adapting," Paddle corrected. "Evolution takes generations. This is epigenetic adaptation, her body responding to environmental conditions by activating latent genetic potentials. But yes, if this continues through future generations, we may eventually see true evolutionary adaptation." The Council has never encountered this phenomenon in any colonization effort, Selkin noted, his voice barely audible through his suit's communication system. "Because no species has ever successfully reproduced on a Class 5 death world," Paddle replied. "We believe this validates our approach. We're not just surviving on Mars. We're becoming part of it, and it's becoming part of us." 6 months after his visit to New Adaptation, Selkin presented his comprehensive report to the full Galactic Council. The chamber was uncharacteristically silent as he concluded his findings. The human colony on Mars not only continues to survive, but is demonstrating unprecedented integration with the planetary ecosystem. Their population has grown to 372, including 3 natural births. Their extraction of rare minerals has reached economic viability, and their medical discoveries, particularly the compound they call conversion fluid, represent potentially the most significant medical breakthrough in Council history. High Councilor Vextra's tendrils pulsed with what Selkin recognized as intense interest. "And you believe their success is due to this integrative approach rather than technological superiority?" "Without question," Selkin confirmed. "Their technology is, by Council standards, relatively primitive. Their success derives from a philosophical difference in how they perceive their relationship with hostile environments." Ambassador Chen Wei of Earth, who had remained silent throughout his presentation, finally spoke. "Observer Selkin's findings support what we attempted to explain when requesting colonization rights. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill us in countless ways. We learned long ago that fighting against a hostile environment is less effective than finding ways to work with it. The implications extend beyond Mars," Selkin added. "Many worlds previously classified as uninhabitable might be approached using modified versions of the human methodology. Additionally, the medical and scientific breakthroughs emerging from New Adaptation could benefit all Council species." The debate that followed lasted for weeks, as the various species represented in the Council grappled with the philosophical implications of the human approach. Some expressed concern about the ethical dimensions of biological adaptation versus technological isolation. Others focused on the practical applications, particularly the medical potential of the conversion fluid. Eventually, the Council voted to establish a multi-species research outpost in orbit around Mars to study the human methods and explore potential applications for other biologies. Several species volunteered representatives to attempt modified versions of the human adaptation protocols under careful medical supervision. One standard year after the first humans landed on Mars, Director Patel welcomed a delegation of 26 representatives from 17 council species to new adaptation. The settlement had grown into a proper colony, with over 500 human residents living in structures that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. Gardens of both earth and native plants flourished in areas that had previously been barren rock. Several of the massive alpha predators now regularly patrolled the colony perimeter, keeping smaller predatory species at bay in what the humans described as a mutually beneficial arrangement. Most remarkably, many of the humans now moved about with minimal protective gear, their bodies having adapted to tolerate the once lethal atmosphere for extended periods. The children born on Mars demonstrated even greater adaptation, requiring protection only during the most severe weather events. "Welcome to new adaptation," Patel addressed the delegation, standing without any environmental protection beyond a light-filtering mask. "What you see around you isn't a victory over a hostile world, but a partnership with it. We didn't conquer Mars. We joined it, and in doing so, we've both been transformed." As the various council representatives emerged from their environmental pods, each carefully designed to allow controlled exposure to Mars' atmosphere under human guidance, Selkin recorded the moment in his official capacity. But he also made a personal note, one that would not be included in his formal report. "Today marks what may be a fundamental shift in galactic civilization's approach to expansion. For millennia, we have sought to impose our requirements on the worlds we colonize. The humans have demonstrated another path, one of mutual adaptation and transformation. They have turned a death world into a home not by changing the planet, but by allowing it to change them. In doing so, they have changed us all." In the distance, a storm gathered on the horizon, one of the massive electromagnetic tempests that had destroyed countless exploration drones and forced previous expeditions into emergency lockdowns. The humans made no move to seek shelter. Instead, they had erected what they called harvesting towers to capture the storm's energy and convert it to power for the colony. "The storm will reach us in approximately 2 hours," Patel informed the delegation. "We've prepared observation areas where you can safely experience it. It's quite spectacular. The lightning here forms patterns unlike anything on Earth or any other council world." As the council representatives prepared for their first taste of Mars' untamed fury, Selkin noticed several human children playing near the colony's edge. They wore only minimal protective gear as they collected samples from native plants under the watchful eyes of both human adults, and remarkably, one of the massive alpha predators lounging on a nearby rock formation. The children appeared to be singing something, a simple melody that rose and fell with the wind. To Selkin's astonishment, some of the local vegetation seemed to be responding, swaying in patterns that didn't match the air currents. "They're communicating," explained Dr. Okafor, who had noticed his interest. "We discovered that the fungal networks respond to certain sound frequencies. The children developed this method spontaneously. We think the plants are actually teaching them." As the storm approached and the sky darkened to a deep purple streaked with orange, Selkin observed the faces of the council representatives. Despite their different biologies and evolutionary histories, he recognized a common expression, one he had first seen on the humans when they landed on this supposedly uninhabitable world. It wasn't fear or determination, or even scientific curiosity. It was wonder. The death world that had defeated 17 advanced civilizations was becoming something else entirely in the hands of humans, not a conquered territory, but a partnership. And as the first lightning bolts struck the harvesting towers, illuminating the colony in brilliant flashes of blue-white light, Selkin understood that the true resource of Mars wasn't its minerals or unique compounds. It was the lesson it taught, that sometimes the most hostile environments contain the greatest possibilities for those willing to adapt rather than dominate. That survival doesn't always mean victory over an environment, but evolution with it. That a death world can become a home if you're willing to let it change you as much as you change it. The storm raged through the night, but the colony stood firm, harvesting its energy and dancing with its fury rather than hiding from it. And when morning came, both the planet and its newest inhabitants had once again been transformed.